Introducing YouTube memberships, a fun way to support the channel while getting some exclusive perks. Click the join button to become a member now and get benefits like badges next to your name on videos, behind-the-scenes photos, advantages during the live trivia game, discounts on merchandise, private one-on-one video chats, the ability to request future video topics, and exclusive 8 to 10 minute videos on the history of the NFL. And now, on with our feature presentation. Sunday was a fantastic Sunday around the NFL. I mean, it genuinely might have been one of the best football Sundays of the entire season. Even if this season might be a bit disappointing from an on-the-field product standpoint, Week 10 did not disappoint. You had 5 games decided with a walk-off field goal on Sunday alone, setting an NFL record for most walk-off field goals in one day. Of the 12 games, 9 of them were decided by one possession, with 8 of them being decided by 4 points or less. 2 out of every 3 games being decided by 4 or less? As Meatloaf would say, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And you had some games that will be contenders for the best games of the season, including Browns-Ravens, Texans-Bengals, and Lions-Chargers, just to name a few. There was a lot to love about this past Sunday in the NFL. Too many games that most of the country got to watch absolutely sucked. Yep, it's actually kind of impressive, because Fox had the national doubleheader, so they got to show 2 games across the entire country, showing a game to everyone at 1 o'clock and showing a game to everyone at 4:25. And somehow, they managed to show the 2 worst possible games. It's like playing roulette and betting on all of the red and black numbers, and somehow, it came up on green. Like, it should not have been possible for Fox to not just somehow manage to pick the 2 worst games, but pick 2 games that were absolute duds to not only show to the entire country, but to stubbornly stay on the whole way through, even though the games were well out of reach incredibly early on. At 1 o'clock, it seemed like we had a good game on our hands between the San Francisco 49ers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. 2 teams with a winning record, with one of them riding a 5-game winning streak, and the other one being the favorite by many entering the season to win the Super Bowl? A ton of people had Jaguars 49ers circled on their calendar. And then, well, that happened. The less said about that game, the better, as the 49ers won 34-3 in a game that was just ugly in every sense of the word. The Jags defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. The offensive line couldn't block. Tank Bigsby absolutely sucks. Trevor Lawrence played one of his worst games as a pro. This was one of those games that you just throw the film into the fire and forget it ever happened. Tons of great teams had complete duds of games, and Jags fans can only hope that this was one of them. Because this was one of those games where you knew not even 90 seconds in that it was going to be a train wreck. But okay, that 31-point game was awful for most of the country to watch. But at least there's a 4:25 game that can make up for it. Sure, the appetizer stunk, but maybe the main course will be good. And the main course is, oh god, it's Giants-Cowboys. Gotta love that New York and Dallas media bias that this is America's game of the week. Because who doesn't want to see the Giants and the Cowboys square off after the Cowboys won 40-0 in Week 1? Who doesn't want to see the Giants play with their 2-7 record? Outside of the Captain Jack, who doesn't want to see Tommy way past 21 and still his mother makes his bed DeVito, and the worst offensive football, averaging a grand total of 3 points per first half this season, go up against the Cowboys? And to be fair, this game was a lot closer than anyone expected. And by that, I mean it took the Cowboys a whole 11 minutes to score. This was one of the worst games of the entire season. Heck, the only game that might have been worse was the first Giants-Cowboys meeting. Because when all was said and done, the Cowboys won this one 49-17. And it wasn't even that close, because the Giants scored a garbage time touchdown with 6 seconds left to take it from a 39-point game to a way more respectable 32-point game. So at least they made it a game at the end, because it wasn't out of the realm of possibility for the Giants to get an onside kick, a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, an onside kick, a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, an onside kick, a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, an onside kick, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion in 7 seconds. I've seen it happen before, I think. Maybe it was hallucinating when it happened. Either way, anytime you have a game where one team wins in total yardage 640-172, where the losing team goes 0 for 12 on third down, and where, in the first half, the losing team has 1 first down and amasses a grand total of 17 yards on their first 8 drives, you know it's bad. Like, really bad. As in, you have to question whether this team actually knows how to play football. So the national 1 o'clock game was 49ers Jaguars, which was a 31-point bloodbath. And the national 425 game was Cowboys Giants, which was a 32-point massacre that everyone saw coming a mile away. Which raises the question. Obviously, we know this was a bad doubleheader. But just how bad was this? Just how bad was this slate of games that Fox showed? Well, there's 2 things to break down. Number 1, how bad was this by Fox standards? And number 2, how bad was this by NFL standards? Oddly enough, last year, I did a video about the worst doubleheader in NFL on Fox history. Because during Week 14, I talked about how at 1 o'clock, the national game was the battle between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the San Francisco 49ers, which the 49ers won by 28 points. And the national game at 4:25 was the battle between the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants, which the Eagles won by 26 points. Wow, the first game was a 49ers blowout against a team from Florida that lost in the divisional round the previous year. And the second game was a blowout in the NFC East, where the Giants were on the losing end. History finds a way to repeat itself. Anyways, you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And while researching that, I found 5 doubleheaders that Fox had since they got the rights to the NFL in 1994, where both games were decided by 25 or more points, which is 4 possessions. Those doubleheaders were Week 1 of the 2021 season, where Philadelphia defeated Atlanta by 26, and New Orleans defeated Green Bay by 35. Week 8 of the 2005 season, where New York defeated Washington by 36, and Denver defeated Philadelphia by 28. Week 17 of the 1996 season, where Green Bay defeated Minnesota by 28, and Washington defeated Dallas by 27. And Week 5 of the 1994 season, where Dallas defeated Washington by 27, and Philadelphia upset San Francisco by 32 in what might be the most shocking blowout in NFL history. However, you might notice with all of those doubleheaders decided by 4 or more possessions, that in all of them, there was at least 1 game within 30 points. Sure, you had some games decided by 30 points or more, but never back-to-back. This past Sunday, with the games you've been watching this whole time, the 49ers beat the Jaguars by 31, and the Cowboys beat the Giants by 32. That makes it, quite literally, the first time in the history of the NFL on Fox, which has been around for 30 years, that they had a doubleheader that bad, where both games were decided by 30 or more. So by Fox standards, this truly was the worst doubleheader of all time. They've aired somewhere in the ballpark of 260 doubleheaders, and this was the first time that they've ever had one this bad. No exaggeration, no recency bias, no hyperbole, no bias because I'm a Jaguars fan and have to sit through that mess. Objectively speaking, this was the worst doubleheader in Fox history. But what about by NFL standards? In the history of the NFL on television in the post-merger era, has there ever been a doubleheader that bad? Well, I did some digging thanks to the incredible archive that 506 Sports has, which lists not just which network has a doubleheader, but the announcer pairings for literally every game you can think of, which gives you an idea of what the games were, because you can just look at the announcer depth chart that each network had and match the corresponding games to their time slots. If you don't know about 506 Sports, if you've ever seen one of those NFL TV coverage maps, that was that. Then, I looked at every single doubleheader, where both of the national games were 30-point bloodbaths or more, and went from there. And folks, the results may surprise you, because in the history of the NFL on television since the merger, I found one such instance of this. That's it. Nearly half a century under the modern NFL television format, with multiple networks televising games, and with the exception of this past Sunday, it's happened one time. And oddly enough, The 1 o'clock game featured a team in the NFC West on the road, and the 4 o'clock game involved the New York Giants on the road in an NFC East battle. To find the only other time a doubleheader was this bad, we've got to go all the way back to Week 12 of the 1985 season, in the year of Springsteen and Madonna, and way before Nirvana. On November 24th, 1985, CBS had the national doubleheader. At the 1 o'clock time slot, you had Pat Summerall and John Madden on the call for this game right here, a battle between the Atlanta Falcons and the undefeated Chicago Bears. This was the national game for one reason, and one reason only, and that was the Bears, because the Falcons had entered this game at 2-9 and were 16-point underdogs. Everyone knew this game was going to be ugly, and sure enough, it was, as the whole country got to watch the Bears massacre the Falcons by a final score of 36-0, leading 20-0 at the half. The Falcons finished the game with negative 22 net passing yards. Seriously, negative 22 net passing yards. You, watching this video right now, had more passing yards on this day than Atlanta. Heck, I did too, and I wasn't even born yet. The Falcons as a team went 3 for 17 for 16 yards with 5 sacks, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, which comes out to a passer rating of 0.0, which is your passer rating if you just don't even show up. They had more sacks than passes completed, and they averaged less than 1 yard per pass attempt, which is obviously terrible. The Bears outgained the Falcons 379 to 119 on the day, having more than 3 yards for every yard the Falcons had, and the Bears were just dominant in every sense of the word, in case you couldn't tell. If there was any one game to show that exhibited the dominance of the 85 Bears from a defensive standpoint, this might be the one. But surely, the 4 o'clock game was better, right? Madden and Summerall got a dud, but the number 2 team of Jack Buck and Hank Stram probably got a better game with the New York Giants against the St. Louis Cardinals. Yeah, that did not happen, as the Giants steamrolled the Cardinals at Busch Stadium by a final score of 34-3 in this NFC East rivalry game. To be fair, at least this was a game for some time. The Cardinals led it 3-0 at the end of the first quarter, and the Giants were only up by 1 score at the half. So unlike the 2 games in the doubleheader this past Sunday, there was at least some doubt for some time as to who would win. But by the end, yeah, this was ugly with a capital U, as the Cardinals turned it over 5 times while getting sacked 8 times and throwing 3 interceptions. George Adams was a massive bust for the Giants as a team's first-round pick in 1985, half because of performance and half because of injury. But this was the only game where he really looked like the player that the Giants hoped he'd be, as he had 113 rushing yards and a touchdown, making this the only game where he had over 100 yards rushing in his entire career. That gives you an idea of how dominant the Giants were on this day, and how bad the Cardinals were. So you had a 36-point game in the 1 o'clock slate, and a 31-point game in the 4 o'clock slate. And nearly 40 years ago, that was the only time something like this happened in NFL history. Until this past Sunday, that is. And the absolutely baffling thing about the doubleheader between these teams behind me right here is the fact that Fox did not switch out of any of those games. That's a whole nother topic of discussion and debate. But really, across the country, a lot of people were stuck with 49ers Jaguars the whole way through. And Giants Cowboys, the entire country was stuck with the whole way through if you got that game at the start. Even though those games were over well before the fourth quarter, and even though those games were absolute bloodbaths, and worst of all, even though literally every other game that Fox had was a better game within 1 possession. That was a bad decision by Fox on so many levels for so many reasons, and it only amplified the fact that this truly was the worst doubleheader of all time. At the very least, it's either number 1 or number 2. And I'm inclined to lean toward number 1 over that 1985 doubleheader. So which doubleheader was worse? The one from 1985 or the one from this past Sunday? Either way, the fact that this doubleheader was so bad as to be historically bad, to the point where it's almost unprecedented to have a slate that crappy, is kind of impressive, especially considering the fact that every other game was good. Since 1970, when the merger happened and the broadcasting rules became what we know of today to some extent, there have been somewhere in the ballpark of 850 weeks of football. That's 850 doubleheaders on networks, whether they are CBS, NBC, or Fox. And perhaps no doubleheader in the history of this sport was worse than what we saw transpire on Sunday with 49ers Jaguars and Cowboys Giants. The doubleheader this week comes from CBS, and it will be the Steelers-Browns game at 1 o'clock and the Jets-Bills game at 4:25. We can only hope that it will be better than this past week. Although based on everything we know, that should be a pretty easy bar to clear. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.